Hello, I'm Juliana and today I'm going to show you how to make a spruced up box cake. So, a lot of people usually make the box cake because it's a lot easier, which is understandable, but the taste of it doesn't really compare to like homemade cake, so I'm going to teach you how to make it as close to a homemade cake as possible. So let's get started. So here I have one chocolate cake mix and one vanilla. I'm going to do them separately. So I'm going to start with the chocolate one. So when making a cake mix, you literally just follow the instructions on the back. And I'm going to add all the same ingredients that the box says, but I'm also going to add more to make it taste better. So I'm just going to pour that in there. And then the recipe says 3 eggs. I'm just going to use the bag as a trash can. Those are all my eggs. Then it also calls for a 1/2 cup of oil. Usually when baking you want to use vegetable oil or canola oil, but don't use like olive oil because the flavor is a bit different and it doesn't really go with the other ingredients. That's a 1/2 cup. Okay, so the normal recipe uses a cup of water, but instead of water I'm going to use milk, and basically the water dilutes the flavor and you don't really want that, while milk kind of heightens it. So that's why we're going to use milk instead of water. Okay. So that's what the original recipe uses. And then here's where we're going to add in the other stuff to make it better. So, the recipes on the box never say to use vanilla, but I always add vanilla because it's just one of those flavors that are always good, even in chocolate cake. So I always add just a teaspoon of that, and you could even add that into other things like pancakes, waffles, anything like that. Okay, so now I'm going to add something that you typically wouldn't see in a cake recipe, and that is chocolate pudding. Basically this adds like a richness to the flavor that like the normal box cake doesn't have, and it also helps with the texture. So you just take the packet and just add it in dry, you don't have to do anything. And if you don't have one of these ingredients, it's completely fine if you don't add it in. Like I typically don't have chocolate pudding laying around, but today I did. So like you don't have to add all of these, you could just add one or the other. Now I'm gonna stir this all up. And because of the pudding, the mixture may be drier than normal, so you may want to add more milk. Okay, so that's it for the chocolate cake. As you can see, this is the consistency. I went in and added in a lot more milk because it was too thick, and you do want it to run so you're actually able to pour it into your pan. So now we're going to move on to vanilla cake. Same thing. Just gonna follow the instructions. Okay, so I'm gonna pour that in there. And then this also calls for a 1/2 cup of oil. Alright, so I poured in my cake mix and the oil. And now we're going to, once again, instead of water, we're going to use milk. So this uses 1 1/4 cups of water, but we're going to do that with milk. Alright, and then the last thing, well, not quite the last thing, but it requires 4 egg whites. So not the whole egg, but just the whites, which means we have to separate it. And I will show you how to do that now. Alright, so there's a few ways to separate your eggs. You could do it with your hands, or you could do it with the eggshell. I tend to use the eggshell just because it's less messy. If you do it with your hands, you want to make sure that you wash your hands afterwards because it is raw egg. So just crack it, and since we want the egg whites, we can just empty it into the measuring cup. And then you just kind of wiggle it around, and if you need to, you switch the shell until your egg yolk is like pretty much just the yolk and not the whites. And then you can either save the yolk and like cook with it, or you could just throw it out. I'm just gonna throw it out because I have no use for it. So we need to do that with 4 eggs, so I'm gonna do 3 more. Or I'll do 1 more on camera. Alright, so I separated out all my eggs, and I'm just going to pour that into my batter. And then the last thing I'm going to add is, of course, vanilla extract. I'm going to do a little bit more than I did for the chocolate, so like 1.5. And then that's it, and you just whisk. I'm sure you could add vanilla pudding to this as well, but I only had chocolate pudding, so. There are also recipes that add sour cream or like, I don't know. There's a lot of different things you can add, but I'm gonna go simple today. Okay, so this is the vanilla. The vanilla is much thinner, and I think I'm gonna actually thin out my chocolate one more because it is pretty thick. So I'll be right back when both my batters are done. Okay, so I thinned out my chocolate one, and this is now the consistency. It's much thinner. And I also decided I want to add a bit of flour into the vanilla one because it is very thin. So yeah, I just think it would be better if it's a bit thicker. Alright, so this is now the consistency of the vanilla one. It is thinner than the chocolate, but it's fine. Okay, so now we are going to prepare the pans. So because of the cake I'm going to be making today, I decided to use 2 rectangular pans. I'm going to try to make a minion cake. And you can really do whatever you want with cakes, which is the fun of it. You can switch up the pans you use, make different shapes. I'm just going to show you how to do the minion cake because, I don't know, a lot of kids like minions. And they're fun to make, so I'm going to show you how to prepare the pans. Alright, so since I'm going to be using rectangular cake pans, the parchment paper is a lot easier to put down. With a circular pan, there is a trick to putting down the parchment paper that I show in my chocolate cake recipe. So that way when you cut the parchment, it's actually a circle and it's not all weirdly shaped. But since I'm using a rectangle, it's a lot easier. So if you're going to do a circular cake pan, I do suggest watching that video to see how to do the parchment paper. I'm gonna cut down the edges so that way it's just like the bottom of the pan that has the parchment, and I'm gonna do that for both of the pans. Okay, so now I cut out the parchment paper for each pan, and I'm gonna spray around the sides. And if you want, you can put some spray on the bottom so that the parchment sticks. Just like that. I'm going to do the same thing here. Alright, so now that my pans are prepared, I'm going to pour them into the pan. And since I have 2 flavors, I decided to do like a marble cake. So I'm going to do half of each flavor into each pan, and then with my knife I'm going to like swirl it around. If you want, you can just do 1 flavor per pan. It's really up to you. I'm also going to get a spatula. Alright, and now I'm going to add in my vanilla. Okay, and then with my knife I'm going to swirl them around. Okay, so now I've swirled around both of my designs. I'm gonna hit it on the table to get out all those air bubbles. And now it's finally ready to bake. And depending on the pan you use, it is different baking times. For rectangular pans, it's about 38 to 45 minutes. But it might just be easier to like use a toothpick. And like when the toothpick comes out clean, it's done. So I'm gonna put these in the oven and I'll see you when they're done. Okay, so now my cakes are completely done baking. They took about 40 minutes and I let them completely cool. And you want to make sure they're all the way cool, or else when you take them out of the pan, they're most likely gonna fall apart. So just make sure of that. So now I'm gonna take it out of the pan. So here I have like a larger pan, so it's easier for me to flip it. I'm just gonna it came out like that. So with the parchment paper it came out a lot easier. You just peel it off. And it's fine if some of the bottom like comes off of it, because you're not even gonna see it. Okay, so now before I take out my other cake, I'm gonna go ahead and frost this one. So I flipped it over because this side is smoother, so it means there will be less crumbs in my frosting. Just be careful if you are gonna flip it over, because it might fall apart. So now I'm just gonna use this type of tub frosting because we're doing an easier sort of recipe, but if it was up to me, I would make my own frosting, and I do show the recipe for that in the other chocolate cake video. So I'm gonna mostly try to use the chocolate one because I want the vanilla one to decorate, so that way I can add food coloring and make it different colors. So I have my icing spatula here. I'm just gonna take this and smooth it on. Okay, so now I smoothed out all my frosting. I did end up using the full tub. And this frosting is typically very sweet, so it's fine if you think like there isn't enough. Okay, now I'm gonna take out my other cake. I'm gonna use the pan from my other one in case it falls out. So it did crack a little bit in the middle, but it's fine because you're not even going to see it afterwards. Okay, so now that my cakes are stacked, it's time to carve it. Okay, so for carving the cake, I like to use a bread knife or like any knife that's serrated because it really gets in there. And then what I do is, you see how your cake has like a caramelized edge on it that's kind of hard? It's like a crust. You're just gonna go around and trim that bit off. And also because my top cake is a bit smaller than my bottom one, then this is also helpful, so that way they're both the same size. Okay, so I just went all the way around my cake. And if you want, don't throw away the crust, because you can use it for other things. Like you can make like cake pops out of it, or just like cake balls. Alright, so now both of my cakes are even, and we can move on. Alright, so at this point, if you want to and if you have enough frosting, you can do a crumb coat, which is basically like a really thin layer of frosting all around it, and then refrigerate it. But since I don't think I have enough frosting, I'm just gonna go straight to the yellow frosting. So here I have a tub of vanilla frosting, and then I also have yellow food dye. I'm just gonna put this in here. So now I'm just gonna put a few drops of the food coloring. You don't need that much. It also depends on what type of food coloring you're using. If it's like a gel food dye, then you really don't need that much. But if it's like the normal food dye, then you should probably add a bit more. So like I added 2 drops and it's already a pretty good yellow. I really make sure to get underneath because there's probably white food dye under there, or white frosting left under there. Okay, so my frosting is pretty runny, so I'm gonna put it in the fridge for a bit so it kind of stiffens up, or else this is gonna run all over my cake and we don't want that. So I'm gonna leave it in there for about 10 minutes and then I'll come back. Okay, so my frosting is now more stiff. I'm gonna frost my cake. And try not to get any crumbs in there. And I'm most likely gonna need more frosting. But we shall see. Okay, so I frosted my whole cake, and now I'm gonna make the other colors with the remaining vanilla frosting I have. So there's about 3 other colors that are gonna go on this cake. So I'm gonna make white, blue, and black. So I have 2 bowls here, and then the white is whatever that's left in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and separate out my frosting, and I'm also going to refrigerate the cake so that the frosting is nice and hard. Okay, so I separated it into 3 bowls. Though I put the most in the one that's going to be my blue because that's for the overalls. So now I'm going to dye them. I only put a few drops. And then for food coloring like this, I would use a toothpick and just like put it in there. Alright, so I mixed in all my colors, and now I'm going to put it in the bag. So the only bag I really need a tip for is the black one, so I'm gonna use this. It is It's just a normal circular tip. And then I'm gonna take my bag and I'm gonna cut a small hole in it. You don't want to make it too big or else the tip can fall out while you're piping, so you don't want that. Okay, and then you want to get yourself a cup and you just fold the bag over the cup. And then you put in your frosting. You may want to get like a spatula so you don't waste any. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the same thing with the rest of my colors except without the piping tip. It's just gonna be a hole. Okay, so I put all the frosting in the bags and the cake has been chilled, so now it's finally time to add the details. So for this, I would recommend looking at like a reference picture if you're copying off something, just so that it's easier to get a sense of what you're doing. So I have a reference picture of a Minion that I'm going to be looking at. So I'm going to start with the overalls. And I made the tip pretty big because I'm going to end up smoothing it out anyways, so the detailing doesn't have to be that much. And then I just put the rest of the frosting in the middle. Okay, and then I'm going to use my icing spatula to smooth it out. And be careful, because you want to like stay inside the lines. And I'm just gonna make sure it's completely smooth. Okay, so that's the blue part done. And now I'm gonna do the eye. Okay, so I just zoomed it in closer so you can get a better look. So now for the eye, I'm gonna put it right here. I'm just gonna make a circle. Now, I'm not gonna make it too big because there's still gonna be a border around it. Okay, and then I can always add more if I need it. And once again, I'm going to use my icing spatula and carefully smooth it out. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then, now with the black, I'm going to do his eyeball. And then also with the black, I'm gonna do his goggles. And then while I'm at it, I'm going to do the buttons. And once again, I'm just gonna use the spatula to smooth it out. And then finally, I'm just gonna do smile. And if you want, you can give him like hair or something. But I think I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, so I just went ahead and added like a black border around the overalls. And yeah, that's it. You can add whatever else details you want, like hair or whatever. Or if you're doing a completely different design, you can get as creative as you want. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed making this Minion cake with me. I hope you had fun. And I will see you next time. Bye.